All right, good morning. We are going to get started right now on the exciting topic of how to convince your boss to buy new hardware. My name is Mikkel Naesager. I am the founder and CTO of a startup called Costner. And what we do at Costner is we use AI to effectively simulate your environment in, amongst other things, brand new hardware. And we see a lot of things that repeat over and over and over again across customers. And the fact that they don't buy enough new hardware is definitely one of the things that are keeping their costs high. So I want to send you home today with some information about that. It's a mandatory disclaimer slide. I'm sure you've seen one of these before. I have no affiliation with VMware, so there should be nothing in there from us. All right, so when you go home today, later maybe, you're going to go home with the impressions of all the latest and greatest hardware right from in here, okay? You're going to look at the new R740s of the world, what's coming up with EPYC processors, what are Lenovo doing, everything else, and you're going to get to go home to this, right? That's what it feels like coming home, and with good reason. We do not replace our hardware nearly as often as we should from a financial perspective. And there are many reasons for that, and I want to start right here. Anyone know where this is? Amsterdam, that's right. Anyone can tell me why those houses are so narrow in Amsterdam? Tax. Yes, it is indeed tax, and it is the very same reason that we replace our hardware every 4 or 5 years rather than the every 2.5 years that would be optimal from a cost perspective. It is simply because of depreciation rules. The old king in Amsterdam and Holland, he thought it would be a good idea to say how rich are people? Well, it depends on the width of the homes they live in. And the same way today, you have CFOs making decisions about how quickly to depreciate servers. And again, your average CFO does not know a server from a French toast. So at the end of the day, what's he going to do? He's going to go with the standard tax man's 4 years depreciation. Now, the impact of that, of course, is that he thinks once those 4 years are up, that asset is free. He's going to sweat that asset. He's going to say, hey, it's free, it's already depreciated, it's not going to cost me anything else. But the fact of the matter is that today, in today's economy, the cost of hardware is negligible in comparison to everything else that you run, especially in your virtualized clusters. We've analyzed some 45,000 workloads, and the numbers we come up with pretty much show that the compute side of things are around 28% of all costs. That is, that is the only share. But what happens is that compute drives everything else. So your hardware configuration, the number of CPUs, the number of cores they have, how efficient they are, drive your software costs. How much workload can you put onto one server? Depends. What are you guys always running out of first in your virtual environments? CPUs? No. Memory? Yes. All right. How often does memory capacity double, roughly, Moore's law? Every 2 years, right? So if we replace our hardware every 4 years, means we could run 4 times as much capacity on the same number of footprints. Now, does your workload quadruple every 4 years? No, it doesn't. That's why we have virtualization. That's why we're running on fewer hardware footprints every year. Are we running on a quarter of the footprints of 4 years ago? No, but it's a downwards trend. So there really is no way around it. If you replace your hardware every generation, your average running costs will be lower. Again, we did a lot of numbers on these. And what you're going to come up here is just, when we look across these 45,000 workloads, what does it cost companies to run 1 gigabyte of VRAM on the different generations of hardware? So these are all companies running this hardware still today. And if we look at some Dell, we see the Dell blades, M610s, M620, M630s, so 3 consecutive generations. And we see that the running cost per generation drops around 30%. And that again is just down to, if you're running M610s, they got 32 gigs of memory, maybe 64. Your M620s, you're lucky you're going to maybe have a few with 256, but most of them are going to have 128 gigs of memory. Whereas your 630s, we see people running these 384, 512, even 768, right? So you can just run more workload. Same is true for the HPs of the world, those of us who run HP blades. The trend is still the same if you enumerate over enough installations. And if you go to the world's most sold server, the DL380 blades, or sorry, rack servers, you see the same trend, albeit at a higher cost level. Now this is the kind of slide that is likely to make a little bit of impression upstairs. This is the kind of thing you go up and show them and say, hey, there's a linear progression here. If we were replacing this every time a new generation comes out rather than every 4 or 5 years, because that's what the asset depreciation sheet shows, there's some good money to be saved. Now, general terms typically don't play too well if we go up and talk to upper management. There's a reason for that. It's like, well, that's in general. We're special, right? We're different from everybody else. Our situation is unique. This is what we do. We take installations and we simulate them in every possible combination of hardware you could imagine. And in this case, what we've done is we've taken a 6-node cluster, and we've, 8-node cluster. We've simulated on new hardware. And what I've highlighted here is just one of those simulations. We've simulated this in a Dell PowerEdge R740 blade with a new Xeon Scalable processor, 4108. And anyone know why Xeon Scalable matters as compared to the older Kaby Lake processors? What's the limiting factor when you do talk CPU and virtualization? Is it CPU utilization percentage? No. It's the switching time. It's the time you have to wait for an available thread to work your workload, right? That's kind of where we're limited right now. And Xeon Scalable, of course, has some really neat technology that allows it to switch very much faster than the previous ones, which means, again, we can go to more vCPUs per workload. If we simulate what this would look like on newer hardware, we see we're effectively going from 8 to 4 hosts. We're utilizing our CPU a little better, and we like that. I mean, you're paying all that software, and if you're using 20% of your CPU, you're wasting 80% of it. Again, this is stuff a CFO can understand. You have a machine on the floor, and you're only using 20% capacity. Doesn't make sense in a manufacturing plant. Why should it make sense here? Right? So the same thing, go over this and over this again. And what does it mean from a cost perspective? The numbers down at the bottom. We can save, this is in Danish kroner, so 7.5 to 1 roughly. We can save 140,000 euros by switching to new hardware in this cluster. It's 140,000 euros for this cluster alone. It's a lot of money when you have a lot of clusters. This will more than pay for the new hardware, and this will more than pay for some of the things we want to buy. Right? Show them in these terms. Show them how we're actually lowering, that gray software bar is a lot smaller than it was in the old platform, and the hardware is actually cheaper as well. Of course, we do have to depreciate it faster if we're switching every 2 years, but it makes a lot of financial sense. So the question isn't so much, is this a good idea? It's about how are you going to show this to your manager? I'd love for you to go home and have that conversation with them and just tell them, you know, like, you're buying hardware and you're looking at it as an insulated kind of thing. This isn't a silo. Why do we buy hardware that way? Well, it's because that's a hardware budget. It's not the same guy who has the software budget, not the same guy who's sitting on the virtualization. And these are different things to look at, right? So if we show them in data, that's great. Now, the thing to keep in mind is, do we just want to release this IT budget back to the, entity? Not really. What we want to do with this, we want to say, hey, so instead of considering moving us to cloud, how about we take some of that, money that we now have available in our IT budget, how about we buy some of the new features we thought? Who has vSAN on their entire environment today? Who has NSX? Right? Who wants those things in their environment? Yeah, we want those things, right? Why don't we have them? They cost money. What are we spending that money on? Having old hardware. Why? Because, the licenses for a M610 blade are exactly the same as the licenses for M630 blade. They cost the same thing, but you can run a quarter of the workload. Right? So having this old hardware means we can't afford the features we want on software, which means our managers say, why can't I have a server provisioned in 10 seconds? Why can't I have fancy schmancy dashboards that do cool stuff with public cloud? And the fact of the matter is you can, but you've got to think differently about hardware refresh rates. So show her. Show your boss the data. That's it. It's one of the, go home, show her that. So, that really is all that matters. Have this conversation with them. These slide decks are going to be up there. Go home, show them, say, if we spend a little more money on hardware, just buy at least newer hardware, we can release so much money that we can use for all sorts of fun things. Heck, maybe you guys might even get a new coworker. Anyone feel overworked? Yeah? Again, why are we overworked? Why do managers cut staff? Because they understand it, right? They just look at hardware, it's a thing. They look at software, it's a thing. They don't know it, so they fire people. So, use this, go home, use this to get new coworkers, use this to go home, get the software features you want. There's no reason to have legacy hardware around. You know, don't go home to the 70s. All right, that's it. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer them for you. All right. Other than that, yeah. Yeah, these slides are so. All right. You know what? We're going to have questions afterwards. Thank you guys all for coming out. I'm going to be over here to the side, and have a safe travels home. All right.